Hey guys, my name's Keyan Houshmand, and in today's video we're going to be checking out how to record metal in FL Studio. Let's have a look. So if you guys aren't familiar with FL Studio is a digital audio workstation or a DAW, and it's most commonly used for stuff like trap and hip hop and all that stuff, and you don't really see many people using it for metal. With that in mind, FL Studio is the DAW that I'm most comfortable with, and it's the one that I've been using since the start, and every video that I've ever done on the channel so far has come from FL Studio. I personally think that it's really underrated for making rock and metal and all that stuff, and just with a quick few details you can really learn how to pick up the program and use it yourself in your own context. Everything that you're about to see in this video is taken from my own personal experience, so everything that I say is not extremely right or extremely wrong. It's just the way that I do it, and you guys can take inspiration from it and hopefully get it going yourself if you choose to use FL Studio as a DAW for making metal. And like I said, because it's from my experience, I'll be using things like virtual instruments like virtual drums, virtual bass, and my guitar as well, making up the bulk of the composition within the example that I'm about to show you. Programs that I use all the time and I've been using for years, such as the GetGood Drums drum libraries and the bass VSTs from Submission Audio. All those things will be shown in this video and how you go about setting them up and routing them in FL Studio. If you happen to be recording real drums or real bass, you can use these concepts that I'm about to show in the video and kind of map out all your routing within the DAW to real drums instead of the fake ones that I'm about to use in this one. So let's get into it, but before we do, if you guys like this video at any time, please feel free to leave a like and a comment on anything you see or hear, and if you want to see more of this stuff, definitely think about subscribing. If you guys want to support me directly, definitely consider checking out my Patreon. I'll have a link for that as well as all my affiliate links down in the description below. So let's get into it. Cool, so as you can see right now we have a completely empty project file. The only thing that I've got going is OBS, and everything's completely empty. There's no instruments loaded, there's nothing on any mixer tracks. What I will do before I start though is I will put Sound ID reference on just to correct the EQ curve of my headphones. That's really cool software. If you haven't checked that out yet, I highly suggest that you do. And I'm also going to put Restream on so that all the audio coming out of this can go into OBS for this video when I'm recording it. Cool, so now that that's set up, there's literally nothing else loaded. So what we can do to start with is just to get rid of these instruments that we're not going to use, just to clean it up a little bit and make sure that nothing is kind of getting in the way. Now from here, I'm going to put this track to null instead of 1, and I'll show you why. What this track is going to be is that we're going to replace it with Contact. If you guys don't know what Contact is, it's basically just a virtual instrument loader. As you can see here on the left, I have a wide array of GetGood Drums libraries as well as Submission Audio bass libraries. I've got a piano in there as well. For this example, we're going to be using the P4 Matt Halpin signature pack. So just by double clicking on that, we have now loaded up an instance of the P4 kit, and we can use that as virtual drums in our mixes. Now to get it working the way that we intend it to, it takes a little bit of work and it is a little bit fiddly with Contact, but I'm going to try my best to kind of go through it now so that you can just save this as a template and then not have to worry about it ever again. So the first thing that I do when I load up an instrument is decide how many outputs I want to be coming out of it. And I figured out with this one I want 10 for this example, and I'll show you why. So when I say outputs, they can basically just be transferred into the mixer tracks in FL Studio, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. The way that I decided that I wanted 10 was that I wanted 1 for the kick. All the overheads and rooms would be 2 separate, so that's 3. But across the snare, toms and cymbals, all the overhead and room channels would be on the same channel. So kick would be 1, overheads would be 2, rooms would be 3. Snare top is 4, snare bottom is 5. All these toms 6, 7, 8, 9. And then the last one is all the cymbals into 1. That leaves you with 10 outputs, and you can set it up any way you want. You can have 16, you can have all these separated, you can have all your toms into 1 if you want it to be a little bit more cohesive, but I like having it like this. Just saves me a little bit more time. I don't have to worry about everything. I can just dump everything in 1 and do very minimalistic mixing and kind of just get a quick result. So to set the outputs, just click this little plus icon here on the Outputs tab. If you don't have the Outputs tab, the way that you can get it to show is by clicking this button up here and clicking Outputs right there. So if I click it again, it'll pop up. We've already got 10 laid out here. I was testing it out before I started filming, but for argument's sake, we're going to do it again. So I'm going to hit that plus icon. I'm going to select 10 channels or 10 outputs. I want them to be stereo, so 2 channels each, left and right. And then I want to start from number 1. Ascending output, yes. Delete existing channels before creating new ones. For this case, yes, because I'm showing you and I don't want to add another 10. I just want to replace the 10 that I've already done. Make this my default configuration. If you guys want to keep this as your default configuration, you can do that. If you're constantly changing between different instruments and stuff, I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm going to keep this off for now. Cool, so now we've got our outputs lined up, and as you can see, even though all the outputs are there, everything is still going through the first mixer. Nothing has been split up into the 10 that we just mentioned before. So the way that we do that is we go into the separate sections here. So kick I'm going to put to 1, overheads I'm going to put to 9, and room I'm going to put to 10. The overheads and room are going to stay the same across the snare, the toms, and the cymbals, so I might as well do that now. So 9 and 10, toms as well, 9, 10, and cymbals as well, 9 and 10. So snare top 2, snare bottom 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then all the cymbals I want to just put into 1, so I'm going to put them all into 8. So when we go back to the full kit, we should be seeing all of these lighting up when we're playing or clicking them. So snare should be going to 2, 3, 9, and 10. Awesome, because snare top, snare bottom, and then the overheads and room. Kick should only be going to 1. All the toms should light up individually. Cool. And cymbals are all in 8. Now, even though we've got it set up in Kontakt now, you might see that on the left here, it's only going through one mixer track in FL Studio. So they're not split up yet, so you guys can't mix them individually. The way that we do that is we click this little VST wrapper settings here, go into the processing tab, and then from there we can align the outputs that we just made in Kontakt into the relative mixer faders within FL Studio. What you can do is scroll to 1 and click auto map outputs, but I wouldn't recommend it because then it will just auto create all of these things that you don't really need. Remember, we only made 10, so I'm just going to do them individually just so it kind of gets rid of any clutter. Cool. So as you can see, what this means is that all these tracks that we just made in Kontakt are now going to the relative track from here. So if we are starting on null, like I mentioned before, then starting from 1 will be the kick, 2 will be the snare top, 3 snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, tom 4, all the cymbals, overheads, and room. Right. So now when we go back into the plugin, everything should be lighting up individually on the left here. Cool. So now we've got our drums set up. Let's go about labeling them in FL Studio and color coding them if you wish, just to keep everything a little bit neater and a little bit easier to access. So to rename something on a mixer track in FL Studio, you just hit F2, and then from there I'm going to name this kick, and I'm going to color code it as, sure, that color seems nice. You can color code these any way you want. The next one is snare top, snare bottom. It's good to label them so you guys have a reference when you're mixing and stuff, so you don't just see random waveforms in certain mixes. You actually know what it is. Actually, I should be a little bit more precise. Rack tom 1. Number 8 was cymbals or spots. Number 9 was overheads, and number 10 was room mics. Cool. So now we can go back and color code them any way we want. Just to keep things simple, I'm going to keep all the drums as red. Ideally, I would separate all like the kick and the snare and the toms all into their separate colors, just to make this video a little bit more quicker. And just to show you guys how to do it, you can set it up any way you want. I'm not asking you to copy everything I do, but just for this video, I'm going to set all the drums on one color. So now that we have all the drums in one color, you might be thinking, how can we route this in a way so that we can have everything going into one channel, parallel compression, reverb, all that stuff, and I'll show you guys how to do that right now. So before we even start doing all that stuff, what I like to do in my projects is I like having a dummy instrument mix fader and then a dummy master. So the reason why I would do that is because, say I chucked in a reference song, so if I was making a song with this project file and everything was going off in here and I wanted to reference my own mix to another song, say it was a Periphery song or a North Lane song or something like that, if I made my master and put all the plugins on this master track, that means that even the song, when I put it in the reference song, would be getting affected by all the plugins that I have loaded up here, which is not ideal because that song has already been mastered, it's already been mixed. I don't need to color it anymore. I want to use it as a reference against my mix. So by having it into a separate fader here and then feeding it into a master, it might be a little bit more CPU intensive, but it's really, really handy if you're trying to reference your own tracks. So something I like doing is that I like having all the raw drum mics and stuff in their own little section, and I like cutting it off and then doing the parallel reverb and all that stuff like that. So what I can do is I can click the next track in the chain, so 11, and then I can click separator, and what it does, it just kind of adds a little line and keeps everything all in the one pane over there. And then from here, I can rename this to, let's call this one drum bus. So it's everything into the one bus. And then I can do drum reverb. Oh, drum reverb. And then I can also do parallel. Is that how you spell parallel? I'm pretty sure it is. Parallel compression. Cool. And then I can add my own little group for that as well. And I'll add a little separator there again. So then they're all masked off in their own little thing as well. I'll color code them as well, just because we're here. So now what I've done is I've made a drum bus, a drum reverb bus, and a parallel compression bus, and I've color coded them to purple, and I've added a little separator. So that means that all of these are going to be going into the drum bus, and then from there the drum bus will be going into the master, and then it'll be going to our ears. But one thing that we can do is that we can put certain sections within here. So for example, if you wanted the snare top and snare bottom to be under one snare bus, so what we can do is go into snare top, right click into an empty track, and then go route to this track only. Same thing with the snare bottom, and then we can change this to snare bus. So now if I play the snare, you can see that it will be going to snare top, snare bottom, and then it'll be lighting up the snare bus as well. If I turn the snare bus off, it will not be playing anything at all because nothing is connected. You just hear the room mics of the snare, but if I turn it back on, you will hear the snare close mics. Same thing if you want all your toms to be in a certain mixer track, you can just assign them to an empty one and then rename it as rack tom. And then what I like doing is I like having my cymbals and overheads in the one bus as well, so I'm going to do that. You guys don't have to do that. You can route this any way you want. You can have no buses at all, but I like doing it this way so you guys can get inspired by this as well. And then from here we can then route those to the drum bus again. So now we have pretty much everything set up for drums. So we have everything going to the drum bus, we've got parallel reverb going, and we got parallel compression. What I'll do now is I'll set all of those into one fader. This is something that I like doing just so I can bring the level of the drums down in one fader, including reverb and parallel compression. And I'll just call this master drum bus. There's so many different things that you can do when you're routing drums and stuff like that, or routing pretty much any instrument, any virtual instrument. You don't have to copy me the way that I do it. You don't have to have a master drum bus or whatever. But if you want to take inspiration from this, you can. I just think it makes life a little bit easier. So now you might be wondering, yeah, you've got reverb and parallel compression, but how do we get that going? So just for argument's sake, I'm going to put, where is it? GTD smash and grab here. I'm going to put parallel compression setting on, and I'm just going to slam it a little bit just so it's doing something. And then reverb, I will put just any reverb plugin, Valhalla Vintage Verb, sure. I'll get a room going, exciting snare room, make sure it's on 100% mix, and maybe adjust the decay a little bit. Cool, so now that we have that set up, we have a reverb going and a parallel compression going, but nothing is actually routed into these two. They're completely empty. The plugins might be on, but there is no sounds from the drum kit going into these. And the way that we can fix that is that we can take this snare bus now, and even though it's only routed into drum bus, we can then add a parallel thing into drum reverb, and we can adjust the volume or how much it's affecting the drum reverb. So for example, if I hit the snare, you can hear now that there's a very long tail of reverb. If I go back onto the snare bus and disengage that, you won't get that tail anymore because I've just turned it off. So with that in mind, we can do the same thing with parallel compression. You can do the same thing on your toms. You can do the same thing on your overheads and spot mics and stuff like that. If you want parallel compression from just your kick drum, but not reverb, you can put it on parallel compression there, route it to that, and not route it to your reverb. There's so many things that you can do. Same thing with rooms. If you want a bit of room reverb, room parallel compression, you can do that as well. The possibilities are endless when you're routing, and it really just is up to you how you want to do it. I wouldn't want that much reverb going in from rooms though, so I can turn that down just a touch. I want snare reverb to be pretty high. Same thing with like the overheads and spots and stuff like that. You wouldn't want the reverb to be affecting it too much, but parallel comp you can kind of chuck on as well. So now if we go back into Kontakt and kind of play around in the whole kit, you can see that everything's kind of lighting up. There's like a little bit of reverb happening. There's a little bit of parallel compression. You guys can set the faders however you want, but just to have this template ready there, loaded, everything is all fine and dandy. I can turn reverb and parallel compression off and it will sound just the same way that it did before. a little bit lifeless, a little bit empty. Chuck those on. Starting to sound a little bit closer to a full drum kit or something like that. I'm not going to show you guys how to program drums because this is just how to set up a project file so you can start making the music. But say we wanted to get drums going, what we do is we go into pattern 1, over here, 2, 3, 4, whatever. We'll go into pattern 1, click the little piano roll, make sure that our thing is selected on contact. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to rename this. So this instance of contact, I'm going to rename it as drums. Cool. So that means when we go back into the piano roll, we can select drums and we have everything going in here, and we can make our beats or whatever and then click onto this project file and pop it into there, and that's our drum track basically. So now if you don't have a real bass like me, the next thing that we need to do is use a virtual instrument bass. So again, we're going to load up contact and I'm going to load up Gin bass. Gin bass is my absolute favorite bass VST. It's modeled after a Dingwall bass, which is the bass that a lot of people in the modern metal scene use, like Periphery, Northlane, who else? There's so many, Intervals, Thornhill, Alpha Wolf. Like there's so many people that use Dingwall basses, and for good reason, because they're really great and have heaps of clarity. Now, as you can see, we've got Gin bass loaded up here in another instance of contact. I'm going to rename this as bass. And you can see here on the left, just like the drums, it's routed to null, so nothing, which means that it'll be going to the master bus. This is not what we want for the bass, because we want to be putting it to a separate mixer track, which will then go into the master. So all we need to do is just basically pick an empty track up here and decide where we want our bass to be. For some reason, I like having mine on 50. It might not be the neatest thing ever, but I just know that in my mind that whatever project I open, that 50 is the bass. So now that it's on 50, what I can do is I can rename it as bass, and I can color code it as well, just because I can. So I'm going to change it to green. Why not? Cool. So that's our bass track. So now what we're going to do is open up another pattern. We're not going to go in the same pattern that we just did for drums. As you can see here right now, we've got bass selected up here, which means that we're trying to generate MIDI notes for bass. If we go back on drums, it will show up with the drum notes that we just put in. I don't want it to be in the same pattern because, as you can see, when you put it in the actual project, they'll be overlapping each other and you can't really turn one on or off. So the way that I like going about it is I like making another pattern. So you just scroll up into pattern 2 and then go into the piano roll again, select bass. As you can see, there's nothing on drums because we haven't put any drums in pattern 2. That was in pattern 1. So if you go back to pattern 1, drums show up. If you go into pattern 2, there's nothing there. And then we'll go into bass and pop our bass MIDI in. Sounds very, very good. And then again, we can put our bass MIDI over here. Now, just to keep things nice and tidy, I can rename this as drums. And I can rename this as bass as well in the actual project so we don't get confused. I can also color code them. I'll do drums as red because that's the drum color, and I will do bass as green because that was the bass color. Cool. So now that we have the bass track loaded, there's a lot of different things that you can do when you're doing it with MIDI bass. For example, I've seen a lot of people route it into 3 separate mixer tracks so they can have the low end comp, the mid grind, and then the high end of the bass, and then they push it all to one fader. That's a pretty advanced technique. I probably won't get into it in this video, but if you guys just want to have one bass track, for example, within Gin bass, there is the option to have the amplifier that's already built in. So I can just turn that on, flick it to the dirty channel, and that's a pre-processed bass sound that I haven't done myself. It's all in the box. I don't have to worry about loading up plugins or anything like that. And if I go back into my piano roll on pattern 2 with bass, we now have a pre-processed bass sound that will all go to fader 50. If I go down here, as you can see, whatever I play should be lighting up 50. Beautiful. So now we've got our drums, we've got our bass. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you guys how to push this all into an instrument bus and then a master bus. So as I mentioned before, you want it to be separate so that you can reference tracks later. So the beauty of having the drum bus all in one kind of fader is that I can now just pick any random track and call it an instrument bus. I'll just call fader 80 the instrument bus. So all the drums, bass, and guitar will go into there. And then from there, we can make a master bus as well. So then from there, we can take that master drum bus, which is currently into the actual master, which is not what we want. We want it to be going into the instrument master first, track 80. So what I can do is that, just to make it a little bit easier to find, because everything's kind of looking the same right now, I'm going to color code that. We'll color code it as blue. We'll do this one as blue as well, because they're kind of like the instrument buses and master buses and whatnot. Cool. So now we can get that drum bus, go down here. It was loaded into there. We can turn that off. And now we can click here. So it's only routed to the instrument bus. Same with the bass. Right now it's routed to the master. We want it to be routed to the instrument bus. And then from the instrument bus, we want it to be loaded to the master bus. And we want it away from the actual master. We want it only going to the dummy master. So it's disconnected from the actual master. It's going to the dummy master. And then that dummy master is just going back into the actual master anyway. So it all ends up there some way or another. But just by having it by having all these routing options, you have a lot of different things that you can do. So this means that if we play this shocking array of notes over here, we should be seeing everything lighting up, including the instrument and master bus. Very, very jazzy. If we turn those off, nothing will play, because even though they're connected to the master, when these tracks are off, because everything is feeding into these two tracks, nothing should be playing. You will see stuff lighting up over here, but because these are disengaged, it means that nothing is playing through them, which means that nothing is playing through the actual master. The sound of silence has never been so beautiful. Cool, so we've got our drums, we've got our bass, we've got our instrument bus and master bus loaded. Now let's get into our guitars. So out of the frame, I have my guitar in my lap, and right now it's going through absolutely nothing. And that's because we haven't selected a fader to put our guitar into. So right now in my interface, in my Focusrite interface, my guitar is going into input 2. So what we can do is pick any random fader that we want. For this case, I'm gonna pick 30. And then from the input, I'm gonna pick input 2. We should be getting cool, so that's working. All right, so now we've got our guitar feeding into insert 30, and this can be our DI input. So right now that's going through the master bus, which is fine. I don't want that going through the instrument bus because then it will be affected by the plugins that we load onto it after. Right now, I just want to hear the DI of my guitar so I can record into it. What I like doing is I like having two faders set up with my guitar, and I'll show you why. So again, we do input 2. So now we have double the guitar DI, right? But what I like doing is I like having the first one, disengaging it from the master. So it's still there, it's still recording, you just can't hear it because it's still on. We haven't turned it off. It's still on, it's still engaged, but it's just not connected to any outputs, which means I'm not getting it in my headphones. It's not playing through speakers or anything. It's just there in the background. And then with the next one that we've just opened up again, which is the exact same thing, we're going to keep it connected to the master, but what we're going to do is load up a amp software on it. So that way we can have the process sound of the amp and still have a DI being recorded in the background. And that's just really handy. Say if you weren't happy with the guitar tone that you were using when you're recording, you at least have the DI there ready, so you can reamp it and send it into a mixer track and reamp it later. So then what I like doing is, obviously when you're doing modern metal mixes and stuff, what the idea is that you have the rhythm guitar, one hard pan left, one hard pan right. So I like doing rhythm, that's not how you spell rhythm, rhythm guitar left, rhythm guitar right, and then I like doing a rhythm guitar bus. And then the same deal as before, as we were routing the drums into one bus and all that stuff, we can now go into guitar left, route it into the overall rhythm guitar bus, guitar right, route it to the overall rhythm guitar bus. And yeah, now we can color code them. So I'm going to change the color of these ones to, what should we pick? This one right here. And now the freedom is basically all up to you. You can have an ambient guitar track, you can have a clean guitar track, you can have layer guitar tracks, you can have sound effects guitar tracks. There's so many different things that you can do. The way that I like having it set up is I have like my layer left. So say if I wanted to have a background chord or something like that, and then layer right. And then I'll have my layer bus. And then from there, I'll have like ambient guitar, clean guitar. I'll color code my layer ones so that they're all nice and tidy. I'll do this color over here, and I'll just add random colors to, actually no, I'm going to keep the same color. I'm going to keep it this color here for the ambient and clean guitar because they're kind of in the same realm. And then from there, I like having all of them loaded up into a guitar bus, just one single fader so that I can control the volume for everything at once. Before we do that though, I'm gonna rename those two faders that are taking the input of my guitar that we made before. So I'm gonna call this one amp, and I'm gonna call this one DI. So just to reiterate now, we've got our drums going, we've got all our guitar tracks set up, we've got our bass tracks set up. Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna go a master guitar track. That's the one thing that I forgot. So master guitar bus, and then from there I will have the buses from the rhythm guitar going into there, I'll have the buses from the layer bus going into there, and I will have the ambient and clean guitar going into there as well, making sure that the layer left and right is connected to the layer bus only. Same thing with the rhythms. Yep, all done, cool. And then from there, that master guitar bus can then go into the instrument bus. And that's basically the setup that I have going on for all the demo tracks that you hear coming from me. That's how I make metal in FL Studio. I'll show you how to record in a second, but say I wanted to add another instrument, if I wanted a piano or something, again, I'll just like load up a piano instrument here, assign it to a track, rename it, color it, and then just chuck it into the instrument bus as well, which is then gets routed to the master bus. And that's basically it. It's pretty much just setting it up first. And then once you kind of understand how everything works and how everything is routed to one another, then it becomes a little bit more simple and you don't have to worry about this stuff so much. You can just worry about writing and playing, because that's what we're doing this for. We like writing and we like playing. So now that we've got all our tracks set up, we've got our guitar input going in, now we can think about actually making the song, and I'll just show you guys how to do that really quickly. So again, we have our drum track here. Just for example's sake, I'm gonna make a really basic drum track and then I'll get back to you and we'll show you how to make a song out of it. So on here on the piano roll, you got your kick, your snare, all that stuff, right? So I'm just gonna make a really basic track. All right, we've got our basic drum track loaded up over here, and what I can do is I can go Control A, Control B, and it just copies it over into the next measure, so it's kind of repeating itself over and over. I've turned the bass track off because we can do that later after we've made our guitars. What I like doing is I like putting my song, I like starting my song one measure in front, so that way I can have the metronome going and it doesn't sound like an abrupt start. So for example, if I now go into here, the way that we record our guitars is very, very simple. You just select the tracks that you want to record. So right here, I've got my DI and my amp. Those are the only tracks that I want to record live. So I'm going to click these little red buttons here. They were already selected, but I've just done it again. And then from there, we can turn our metronome on, turn the count in thing on so it counts in before it actually starts going. And then we hit record. It will ask us what would we like to record. I always select audio into the playlist as an audio clip, because that way it just goes straight in there. It doesn't go into Edison, which is like an audio editor or something like that. It just goes straight into the project. We are not doing notes and automation. We're not doing anything MIDI. That's why I'm picking audio into this playlist as an audio clip. Once we click this, the metronome will start, it will count in one bar and then it will count in another bar because we just moved it over to the second bar in the project. And then anything that I play will be getting recorded into FL Studio along with the drums. Cool, so as you can see, it's just recorded 2 tracks. One of it is my DI, which is this one over here. Very, very bare. And then the other one is the amp sound. So again, it recorded the DI and the amp tracks at once. So now we have both of them. Right clicking on these little dots here means that it's just soloing out a track. So I've just right clicked on the amp track. Again, if I right click on here, it'll solo out the DI track. Turn the metronome off. So what I'll do now is I'll record that one more time, just with the drums, and then I'll show you guys how to pan it left and right like we chose before. Cool, so I've just recorded it again. So we have one rhythm track here and another one over here. So remember how before we set up the left and right in track 32 and track 33? What we can do now is pan these left and right. So on this little icon here, I can click it, drag it down to make it go left, click this one here, drag it up, and it pushes it to the right. So now anything that goes into these two faders will be pushed left and right. So what we can do is we can go back into the project, click on our first rhythm track with the pre-processed amp sound, and we can scroll up to number 32. And same one down here on the second one, we can scroll up to number 33, which means that these tracks are now getting pushed one left, one right, and it should be having a really nice effect and make the guitar seem really wide. So now if we select both of those into our project, we should be hearing one left, one right. So if I solo this one out, it should be going into the left. And if I solo this one out, it should be going to the right. Cool. Play them together. Drums. Guitars are a bit loud. And now I can use my rhythm guitar bus and send the volume down with both of them. Cool, so now if we want that to repeat, what I can do is I can grab my little slicer tool from up here. So select this little slicer tool, slice it at the beginning of the bar, slice out the end of the phrase, cut off anything unnecessary. So click the little draw icon and right click so it deletes it. Then what I can do is I can grab my little selector tool, select this. So as we cut it there before, it's only selecting from things that we've cut. So as you can see, because we cut it there, it's only selecting stuff from here. And then we can press Control B and it adds it onto the next measure, so it should flow nicely. To make it flow even nicer so there's not like an abrupt cut when it changes tracks, what we can do is double click on the track. So what I've done is I've just double clicked on this one, and then we can go into the declicking mode, and I like doing general or generic, and I'll do the same on the right side as well. And if you zoom in, as you can see, they kind of just fade into each other ever so slightly, so it gets rid of any clicks. Now that we've got our drums and guitars set up, I like setting up my bass after the fact. So generally you want your bass to match with your guitar. So even though we just popped all this nonsense in there before just to get something going, I'm going to hit Control A and then delete so it gets rid of it all. And the way I like doing it is I like doing it off the bass note of the chord I'm playing. So if the rhythm was this, my bass would be matching this. So I just kind of, it's E, so then we can kind of match it to our kick drum. So what I can do now, because the kick drum is very, very basic, it's just on quarter notes, I can select this whole thing, copy it over, so Control C, go back into pattern 2, make sure that I'm selected into bass, paste it in, and then make it scroll up all the way to the note E that we had on before, getting rid of this like overlapping one that we had there before. Now it might sound a little strange if we click this little sound icon here next to the piano roll bass, it'll only play the bass. So as you can see right now, the bass MIDI isn't sounding that great. It's sounding very static, very robotic. It's not flowing into each note because as you can see, it's cutting short on the piano roll. So a way to fix that is that we can go Control A, make sure our little draw tool is selected and then drag it so that they kind of connect to each other. Cool, so we've got the rhythm of the bass notes down. Now we just need to pick the notes that we want to play so it matches the guitars. Cool, so that's our very basic bass done. Now we can go back into here, turn the bass on, and play it all together with the drums, which are selected on, and our two rhythm guitars. And then from there, when you go into the mixer channel, when you click this little icon here into the mixers, you can turn things off. So if I want to hear just the bass and drums and no guitar, I can turn my master guitar bus off. Or if I want the guitars seem a little bit loud, so I'm just going to turn it down from the rhythm guitar bus and kind of turn it up until I feel like it's at a good level. Cool. One last little thing that we can do is we have a preset within Archetype Gojira. Oh, it's not here anymore, is it? Yes, it is. It's called Crazy Lead, I'm pretty sure. Yep. Cool. So as you can tell, that was in the key of the song, and what we're going to do now is take that amp sound that we've just loaded up in our amp mixer track, record it alongside a DI. As you can see, it's already selected down there by the 2 red dots, with the metronome, so we're in time. Record it along everything else, and then that can be our ambient track, and we can assign it to the ambient track that we made over here, ambient guitar. So let's just record it quickly. Cool. Oh, please select an audio input first. Okay, no, this is good because it shows a little mistake I did. So as you can tell before, I clicked the ambient guitar track to show you guys that we made one and that we're going to be putting into it later. But now, because I selected that, it thinks I'm recording from that track, and because I haven't selected an input, it's asking me to select one. So I don't want to record from this track because there's nothing going in it. So I'm going to click none, stop the recording, and make sure that we're selected on something that was already selected, so either DI or amp. Press spacebar so it starts recording with the count in. Go back to the project. Cool. So now we have our DI recorded for that little ambient line there. Very faint. Same thing with our amp tone. So now, as I mentioned before, ambient guitar is in number 38. So I can double click this track here, load it into 38, and then from there, it'll be popping up into the ambient guitar track. And from there I can turn the volume down if it's too loud. I'll play it with everything else in the project, so I'm going to select the drums, bass, and the 2 rhythm tracks. Cool. So as you can see, we've just generated all different faders for the drums, bass, guitars, ambient guitars, all that stuff. We've then made drum MIDI, bass MIDI, recorded 2 guitars, push one left, one right, as you can see from here. When we pushed it on the faders, we made an ambient track and assigned it to the ambient fader. And from there, it's a basic songwriting process. We've just made a little chorus or something, or a little pre-chorus. The sound is not the best because we haven't added any plugins into the kick or the snare or anything. There is no mixing going on at all, apart from like the little reverb and parallel compression, which hasn't even been set properly anyway. It's just there for reference, so you guys know what to do when you're setting it up yourself. So when you start loading up plugins, when you start sculpting your kick drum, when you start sculpting your snare, you know, setting compression on your rooms, EQing your guitars, EQing your bass, adding all different plugins to your master and instrument bus, that's when it starts to sound like a real song. But that was not the purpose of this video today. The purpose of this video was to show you guys how you can get started into recording if you're recording metal type of stuff in FL Studio, just like the way that I do. Hopefully you guys got a takeaway out of this, and hopefully you can get started into writing metal stuff in FL Studio if you're trying to get started with all of this stuff. Now we have all of this set up, and we just want to be able to access it whenever we load up a new song. If we have a song idea, we just want to be able to load up something quickly so that all the drums are set out, all the guitars are set out, the bass is set out, all the buses are set out, whatever. We don't have to worry about doing it all again. What we can do is we can save as. I've made a new folder called templates, and I'm going to save this as P4 drum metal template. And then from there, whenever you want to make a new song, you can load up that same template and then just save as under another name and start making your song. And that's basically it. And that is how I record metal in FL Studio. So if you guys found this video useful, definitely think about leaving a like and a comment on anything you saw or heard. And if you want to see more of this stuff, definitely think about subscribing. Again, if you guys want to support me directly, definitely consider checking out my Patreon. I have a link for that as well as all my affiliate links down in the description below. Thank you to all my Patreons. Without you guys, I would not be able to make videos like this. Until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. I know it was a long one. Ciao.